CenterPoint can be set up to calculate your workers' compensation tax liability as well as generate workers' compensation reports. To set up workers' compensation, we're first going to need to set up our workers' compensation classes by going to Setup, Payroll Details, and Workers' Compensation Classes. You see that I have a number of workers' compensations classes already set up, and although I need to set up one for a fishing tour guide, I need to set up a fishing tour guide for a different state. My original one was for the state of Minnesota, but I need to set up one for the state of Colorado, so each workers' compensation class is particular to the state that it's for. I'm going to click New. And since I can't reuse the same abbreviation, each abbreviation needs to be unique, I'm going to name this Colorado Fish Tour Guide. And we'll go ahead and put in the name. And we're going to choose the state. Now, choosing the state could initiate some changes onto this screen. For example, if it was a state that required this to be reported on a tax form item, we'd have this box enabled to allow us to choose a tax form item. And if it was a state that required an employee portion as well as an employer portion, we would also have a place down in the rate detail in order to enter in an employee rate. Now we're going to go ahead and put in the class code for that state. And when I hit tab, it takes me over to a liability account. Now you will have an option to not post this to a liability, but instead just set it up so that it'll generate a workers' compensation report for you. But in order to set up a class, we do have to choose a workers' compensation liability account here. So that should be a payroll liability account. And then since it is an additional employer expense, I'm also going to choose an employer expense account to put that expense to. So I'm going to put that to my payroll taxes expense account. There is a place for an effective date here. However, this is not generally where we would make a change to the rate later on when the rate changes. Usually effective dates are associated with rate changes, but since this isn't where I would typically make my rate change, we'll talk about that at the place where we do make the rate change. Okay, certified payroll reporting can be utilized by going ahead and putting up to 4 codes for this workers' compensation class. Okay, we're not going to set it up for certified payroll reporting, but I'm going to go ahead and enter in the class code for this workers' compensation class. And then we're going to hit save. Now hitting save automatically adds it to the employer record. And even though it's already added to the employer record, I do want to take you there because that is where you will change the rate and also where you will tell the system whether or not you want to post it to a liability or not. So we're going to go to Setup, Payroll Details, and to the employer. And I'm going to edit the employer and go to the Taxes tab. I'm going to highlight the state of Colorado, and you'll see that workers' compensation's already been added there. I'm going to go down to workers' compensation. And on the right-hand side is where you have a place to put in your workers' compensation ID, so whatever ID number might have been assigned to you. And then this checkbox here will tell the system whether or not you are actually going to post this to a liability account. So will generating each pay run create a liability and an expense, or is it something that you're just using to calculate the reports? So I'm not posting it to a liability, so mine is unchecked. But you should, to make accurate reports, you should tell the system whether or not it should use your overtime premium wages, which is the base rate times the multiplier, or just use the base rate in the calculation of the reports. Okay, as I'm highlighted on workers' compensation, you see that it already added the Colorado Fish Tour Guide here. But as I highlight each one of these different workers' compensation classes there, on the right-hand side, there is a place for me to go ahead and put in the rate, and there is an effective date there. So if this rate has a rate change, this is where I would change the rate. I would go ahead and click Add and then put in a new rate, and then that rate would become effective as of that point, but it would continue to use the old rate up until that effective date. I'm going to click Save on that, and then we're going to add it to our employee by going to Setup and Employees. I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to highlight this employee, and we're going to edit them. And the Taxes tab is where you're going to add the workers' compensation to that employee. So I'm going to highlight it. And first I'm going to highlight the state of Colorado because I haven't added workers' compensation yet for this employee. So I'm going to click on the checkbox to add workers' compensation. And then I'm going to highlight workers' compensation. And down below, it has all the workers' compensation rates for this state. So I'm going to add that Colorado fish tour guide, but I'm also going to add the bike tour guide and the ski instructor because this person sometimes does other things for us. Then once I've selected all the workers' compensation rates that can be used for this employee, I'm going to go up to the employer at the top, and on the right-hand side here, I'm going to select the default workers' compensation class for this employee. Okay. So even though this one's the default, there may be a need to change it during a pay run, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in a pay run. I'm going to click Save on this employee, so we've added it to that employee. And I'm going to go to a timesheet to show you how during timesheet entry you can change the workers' compensation class, and then I'll show you in a pay run. Underneath Processes and Timesheets, if I highlight this employee, and let's say on this particular date, I'm choosing this earning of road biking, and that's not his typical workers' compensation class. So he had 8 people and he had worked for 12 hours, and I need to change the workers' compensation class because the default one is a fishing tour guide, and this time he was a bike tour guide. So I could click on the Detail button here, and there's a tab for Accounting and Taxes, and that's where I'm going to find the workers' compensation class. So I can change that to a bike tour guide and click OK. If you don't want to have to click on the Detail button each time, you can also right-click, go to Add Remove Columns, and add that column to the screen. So I'm going to add workers' compensation class to the screen. And now instead of going to that Detail button, I can simply click on the lookup to change the workers' compensation class right here on this screen. Okay. Additionally, I'm going to get out of here, and then I'm going to take you into a pay run. So that was the timesheet. Now I'm going to go into a pay run. So let's go to Processes and Pay Employees. We're going to add Robert Ingram to that, and we're going to go to Enter Pay. As I'm entering in pay for these employees, you'll notice that I already have a column displayed with my workers' compensation class on it. So if I was putting in something for mountain biking, let's say 10 pieces, and this person had worked 20 hours, it's going to generate their pay, but it's going to the Colorado Fishing Tour Guide. And so just like on the timesheet, if I've added it as a column here on this grid, I could simply change the workers' compensation class by going to that field. Or I could click on the Detail button and go to the Accounting and Taxes tab and change the workers' compensation class there. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of there. And just finally, the last thing that I need to show you is where you can find the workers' compensation reports. Those workers' compensation reports are found underneath Reports. And then under Payroll Tax Data Reports, there's a section for workers' compensation. And this is where you're going to find those workers' compensation reports. If you're in a state that has both the employer portion and an employee portion, you definitely want to select this bottom report, not one of the upper 2 reports.